Hi friends, how are you doing? I wanted to do a quick video on motivation. So I just came back from a walk and was thinking about how to stay motivated to kind of keep doing the things that we want to do. It's a major challenge, something that I run into a lot, and I've gotten questions from folks. It's pretty common that we have ideas, we have ambitions, we have projects we want to do, and we just can't really get ourselves to be motivated to do them. Um, and I've seen a lot of different sort of thinking and resources on this, and a lot of times it tends to sort of try and simplify it to like, okay, this is the key to motivation. And I actually think there's kind of a way to think about it that might be a little bit more flexible. So the way that I try to think about it is, you want to have sort of a motivation tool belt, sort of a framework, a range of different things that will help you get motivated depending on the time and your mood and different situations. And you want to be able to kind of work through those and try different things, because sometimes the same technique is not always going to work. So I'm going to go through a few different approaches and sort of tactics that have worked for me, and hopefully they're helpful. So the first one is building a practice. So what I mean by that is having some consistent, rigorous, sort of regular scheduled activity, whether that be, publishing something weekly or just sort of sitting down to journal every single day. And you want to get to a point where you've done it so many times, so consistently, that it's turned itself into a habit, and it's almost like breathing. And the reason why that's important is because then you no longer think about, hey, should I do this thing or not do this thing? Because that's really where the danger comes, right? And so, I've been publishing newsletters for quite a long time now. And so if I was still at the point where I was like, should I publish a newsletter or should I not? I mean, I would just get so wrapped up in my head about it that probably I wouldn't end up doing it a lot of times, I think it's just too difficult for us to remake that decision every single time. So the more you can just sort of like, nope, it's not even a decision, I'm just doing it. That's the most powerful one. The second one I think that is quite relevant to me is paying attention to your sort of personality type. So I'm somebody who is sort of aspirationally, more similar to what you might call like a polymath mindset, or sort of a generalist mindset, where I like to do lots of different things. And what that means is that if I end up doing the same thing like all the time in a row, I get really bored, and I really struggle to stay motivated with that thing at that point. And so what I do is I actually mix it up. So in any given week, I'm doing some programming, I'm doing some writing, I'm doing some drawing, and each time I switch into something different, it feels like it's new. I get like really energized, like I'm doing something for the first time. And so, you can have different sort of ranges of how long you're talking about. Like, it could be within the same day, could be within a week, could be sort of longer term, like, over several months. But, you kind of want to structure it so that you give yourself that flexibility if that is something that you're kind of looking for. The third one is, and this one is really hard to do, is not doing anything and just resting. And there's a number of reasons why this is valuable, but obviously, we're humans, we're not machines. And so sometimes you just need to take a break, you need to go take a walk. For example, I just went for a long walk and I came back kind of energized and felt like, hey, you know what? I want to record this video. So, even though what I was doing was going and just sort of not really accomplishing a task, or not being productive in the traditional mindset, it ended up being quite helpful. And the reason why I say it's particularly hard to do is just because we're really trained to think about ourselves as productive people. So we're always supposed to be doing work, always supposed to be doing output. So it's really hard to just stop and do nothing. But it's also very important. And some of the most interesting serendipitous stuff comes out when you give yourself some space. And I talk about this a little bit in another video, which I'll link to, in terms of how work and meaning and purpose have all been kind of tied up together, where it's really, really hard to separate ourselves and our identity from work. So it's not easy. I think this is one of the hardest things, but there's small things you can do, like giving yourself some time and space. The fourth thing I would say is recognizing that you need to manage your energy, as I like to say. I also have a video on this, which you can definitely check out. But the essence of it is recognizing that some tasks that you work on, you're gonna feel so energized. You just do it for a few minutes and you're like super energized. There's other things you work on, they just drain you. You can only do it for a few minutes. It feels like you're doing it for hours, right? It's so draining. And so we don't always have choices around what we get to do, but it's important to observe and like pay attention to the patterns. If you're consistently, regularly, all the time doing work that really feels draining and you feel like you have to find hacks to motivate yourself just to do that work, like there's a signal there, and like I said, it's really hard sometimes to actually change what we're working on. We don't always have choice, but you have to pay attention to the cost. What's the cost of constantly having to force yourself? Because that takes energy. It's really draining to have to do that. So paying attention to that and trying to find ways to switch it up to try and move towards a direction where you're doing work that energizes you and that you don't have to constantly seek out and facilitate motivation for. And so the fifth and the sixth are both kind of related, but they're about community. So the first one is this: you can actually get a lot of energy from community, and I think this is always kind of underestimated how much energy you can actually get from community. So as an example, like I'm doing this video, and I hope that someone watches it for sure, but I hope that people will reply and be like, hey, this resonated in this way, and here's another approach, here's another idea, because that is actually fuel. And, I've seen that happen with my writing, when I'm on Twitter, with videos. It's actually always surprises me how powerful that can be when other people are sort of engaging and sort of responding and reacting. And that's a really important thing to try and facilitate if you can. Again, if you have that network, that's wonderful. But if not, then, is there a way to facilitate that? How can you bring those people around you so that you have that opportunity? There's an awesome story. I'll link to the video that Steve Jobs once told in an interview. And he talks about what's called like the parable of the rocks. Basically, it's a story where he, when he was a kid, he went over his neighbor's house, and the neighbor, took him to his garage, and he basically said, okay, go and find a bunch of rocks, like just random rocks. And so Steve goes and he gets a bunch of these like sort of jagged, dirty, messy sort of rocks, like sort of nothing special. And he puts it inside this rock tumbler. And he says, okay, go back and come back in like a week or a few days or whatever it is. And so this rock tumbler's sort of tumbling, and the rocks in there are kind of, they're smashing against each other. And, he comes back later and he opens it up, and there's these smooth, beautiful, polished rocks in there. It's a great video. You should definitely check him out. Check out the video of him telling the story. But in his view, that's kind of a metaphor for how great products are built. And I really love that, because essentially it requires you to have friction, a little bit of spark, right? So the spark kind of gives you that energy, and the friction kind of shapes your idea. Like if you imagine a rock by itself, just sitting there, like it can't polish itself, right? It has nothing to hit against. It needs something to sort of engage with, interact with. And that's sort of the fundamental thing about us as humans. Like we're meant to be interacting with people. So a lot of times we try and think about, like, how do I stay motivated? How do I motivate my own work? And it's like, hey, well, we live in a society for a reason, right? So try and find that from other people. And a related part of this, sort of the sixth one that I would say is, you can also get accountability from that community. So you can get feedback and improve your ideas and get energy, but you can also get accountability. Just sort of telling people like, hey, I really, this goal is really important to me. Can you just help me achieve this by just checking in on me and just asking me about it? Like some basic thing like that. A lot of times I will like pepper an idea on Twitter or somewhere and be like, I'm thinking about this thing. And then someone will ask about it later and be like, hey, did you ever end up writing about that? And I'm like, great. that's some accountability for me to actually go and do that. And without that, I just wouldn't have done it. I mean, all the fears and the critics come up like, oh, no one cares what I have to say. No one wants to read this. And, I mean, you can't always rely on that, but it can be a technique that works well. So I guess the last one I would say is, you might have other techniques in addition to these, but I just talked about a whole bunch of different ones, right? So maybe you have some more. And so the idea here is sort of oscillate and switch between all these different ones so that at any given time you're like, okay, what do I feel like I need? You know what? I'm just going to go take a break, or today I'm going to go and switch it up, or today I'm going to, put something out there and get some community energy, or rely on my practice this week to make sure I publish something, but sometimes none of those are going to work. Sometimes, like, no matter what you do, you just can't, you don't feel excited to do the thing. And this is when you sort of, if it's really important to you, you just have to force yourself. You don't want to force yourself to do anything, but sometimes there's an idea that I resonated with, because I don't really like the idea of forcing yourself. It sounds very like sort of almost like violence against yourself. But I kind of think of it a different way, which is think of it as, this idea around action preceding motivation. So have you ever sort of been unmotivated to do something, but you start doing it, either because someone told you to or you had to, and then you kind of get into it and you're like, yeah, actually it's kind of fun. And you end up doing a whole bunch of stuff, and you have momentum and you start going. So, the idea there is kind of like, it's like a car that, needs a jump start, right? Like sometimes you just have to, or an ignition really, just some kind of spark. And so sometimes you just have to push yourself and get that little bit in. It's like, okay, I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes. I'm just going to do this for 10 minutes or whatever. And, of course, if you really get into it and you still just don't feel motivated, then that goes back to one of the earlier things, which is like, what's going on here? Why do I keep trying to force myself to do stuff I really don't want to do and don't enjoy even when I get into it? But most of the time, what's probably going to happen is you kind of frustrated, and then you just push yourself in that situation. You sit down at the desk, you do whatever you need, and then bam, the car's moving and you're kind of flowing and you're going. And so like I said, like these are all different techniques. Sometimes the answer is resting. Sometimes the answer is trying one of these techniques. Hopefully, some of these are useful. I'd love to hear from you. Like I said, a lot of the reason why I shared a lot of this content is just sort of getting more community energy. So, please do comment, share this, or tweet at me. If you subscribe to my newsletter, my email is always open. I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.